All right. Oh, hold on. People are coming in. All right. So welcome, everybody. We are going to start officially. And we're going to talk a little bit. As I said and indicated, you can feel free to turn your cameras on if you want. But a lot of the session is going to be very interactive. While I am speaking, you can keep yourselves muted. But of course, if you have a question or comment during the presentation, feel free to stop and ask or stop and share. Make comments. As I said, at the end of the session, at the end of any session that I do, I really want us to have takeaways and not just good information that we could have gone and Googled, right? But actual information that we can use in our classrooms. So today's session is about how to create an engaging asynchronous lesson. And of course, these terms, synchronous, asynchronous, have kind of become like household words we're using now, which probably before COVID, we would not have necessarily been using, or some of us may have heard the terms for the first time when this whole pandemic struck and we were now at home having to teach children. And just listening to teachers, I'm hearing a lot of definitions floating around about what asynchronous is, what synchronous is. And I feel like whilst most people have the definition, the dictionary definition of what asynchronous is, we still have a little difficulty translating that into a lesson online. So I hope at the end of the session that that's what you're going to get. Now, for those of you who don't know me, there are some of you who don't know me. So I just wanted to introduce myself. I am a teacher. I have been teaching at my current school for the last 16 years, but I have been teaching prior to that. So in total, officially, I've been teaching 18 years, but even outside of the official schools, I was teaching. So I started teaching while I was in sixth form. I used to have students coming to me at my home, and I had set up my private little lessons. And after sixth form, I started teaching at my alma mater. So yeah, I've been teaching since age 19 officially. So it's really a passion of mine. I also do professional development for teachers, specifically in ICT. I am qualified in e-learning, and I also am qualified in digital technology in terms of education as well. And I am a mommy, so I know the struggles of being a teacher and being at home with your children. I have a 8-year-old twin, so this is them here, right? And well, I am the director of 21st Century Educators, for those of you who may be on the page but didn't know. So these are just some of my rules, and I hope that the information that I share is going to be very useful. So we're going to start. What do we want to know at the end of the session? I want you to be able to actually define what asynchronous teaching is, and not just define it in terms of, well, it means X, Y, Z, but really being able to then say, okay, what does this mean for my standard 5 class? What does this mean for my Form 2 class? What does that actually look like with students that I know have these difficulties? So I want you to think about your students. I want you to be able to recognize the benefits of asynchronous teaching, because the other thing that I've been hearing is that there are teachers who are in front of a screen from 8 to 2:30 teaching children for a whole day online. And that is not healthy. It is also not necessarily beneficial to the students, and it certainly is not beneficial to you, the teacher, sitting down for all those hours on a screen. And then, of course, the key takeaway would be to actually create an engaging asynchronous lesson, right? So at the end of the session, I actually want you to be able to do that. So let's start by defining asynchronous. So asynchronous learning, of course, in terms of a dictionary definition, means that the interaction is not real time. So what we are doing here is synchronous. You are on the screen, I am on the screen, the interaction is immediate. I can ask anyone a question, you'll be able to respond. And so asynchronous learning does not require real-time interaction. It is instead where you make content available in an online setting. So whether you use Google Classroom, you use Microsoft Teams, you use Edmodo, or whatever other platform, you place that content there for students to access when it suits their schedules. But very important, a lot of teachers don't understand, is that you still have to have deadlines. And the deadlines, of course, must be reasonable deadlines. So you're not going to put something 8 a.m. and tell the student, I want it by 9 a.m. in an asynchronous setting, right? Because the whole purpose of asynchronous setting is that it is flexible enough to allow students, reasonable periods of time to complete the work. So when you think about asynchronous, and this is where I want a couple of people to give some feedback, what do you want to achieve when you send home an asynchronous lesson? Very quickly. So I'm sending home, I just said that this is where you are not online with your students, so you're sending home something for them, and they get to complete it when it suits their schedule. What do you want to achieve when you send them an asynchronous lesson? Anybody? And like a good teacher, if you all don't answer, I'm going to call names. So you all may as well.
Well, I would want them to complete the assignment, most important.
Right? So Avalon says she wants them to complete assignment. Anybody else?
And not just complete the assignment, but complete it in a timely fashion.
Right? Complete it in
Not
a
take too
timely
long.
fashion. Right? What else? Anything else?
I'd like
And
to make sure that they achieve the objectives.
right. You want to make sure they achieve the objectives. You want to expand on that a little bit? What do you mean by that?
Um, and we could define certain things. They could just look in the notes and define it, but do they really understand the concept behind, whatever the content says? Basically, it's not for them to passively get involved in just reading the notes or looking at the content, but for them to really get a true understanding, and that would be based on the objectives, I would say. So
Right? So good. So thank you very much. So the second question. Oh, so I can't, it's difficult for me to see the chat. So if somebody could read what's in the chat for me. I know some people can't put on their microphones, but with the presentation, it's a little difficult for me to read the chat, right? Mhm.
I was going to read the chat for you.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes. Alvin Brown said, with asynchronous learning, I would like them to be engaged and understand the content.
Right. So then that brings us to the second question. What are some of your biggest concerns or difficulties with asynchronous teaching? Those of you who have tried it, what have been some of the things that you've encountered? Just trying to get it. Yes. Has anybody tried asynchronous teaching?
Hi, good
Yes.
afternoon, Leanne.
Yes?
Leanne here. Um, just to jump back a little bit, I wanted to add on to what everybody would have said. And for me, something different from what was said before, the intent of doing an asynchronous is that the children are able to cover specific things that they don't necessarily require me to go through with them. And it's more about being familiar with content so that when we do have a synchronous session, you can reflect on what you did and identify to me, okay, miss, this is what was challenging to me. Can we focus our synchronous sessions on that particular objective or topic? So some of the concerns that I would have had seeing that is really the children understanding the intent of the lesson in terms of that and being able to complete it in a reflective manner so that they get the best out of it rather than just looking at it as, oh, I have this work to do or these set of questions to do or content to read, and there is no kind of real meaningful learning taking place.
Um, Hi, may I?
Yes, go ahead.
I really like what Miss Thea just said, because how I tend to approach my classes is that if I have them twice with the week, I would treat the first class as somewhat of a lecture, as in
Yeah.
we talk and we discuss and whatever else, and then the second class, ideally, because it hasn't really happened yet, because they would be there and supposedly supposed to be working, but I'm there still going through, but I'm using the second session kind of like a tutorial. So
Okay.
the work that they would have gotten at the end of the first session, we kind of they do work on their own in the second session with a little bit of guidance from me. But I think that's not asynchronous, is it? It's feeling as though it's still synchronous. So yeah, so that's where the challenge is, I think, for me, because apparently I love seeing my children's faces. So I have yet to get this thing right. Yeah. Okay.
And
Thanks.
that's okay. I mean, that's why we're here. That's why, as I said, it's a new thing for most people. So that's why we're taking our time and going through it. All right. So let's move on then. So I heard of some very important things that I want to address. Some things, like I heard Nian, I believe, said, she wants to be able to send them her work and then when in the synchronous setting, be able to um, then say tackle probably the difficult areas or something like that. Do you know that your asynchronous teaching is very similar to the flipped classroom model? That is exactly what it's supposed to be, right? And so a lot of teachers are afraid of doing the asynchronous lesson because they feel as though if I'm not there, how am I going to get my students to do the work? How am I going to engage them? Why would my student go online if I'm not over them with a big stick, right? How am I going to actually, why would my student go on? So I'm going to show you some ways to do so. And then how do I know if they actually did the work? If I tell them to read a passage, how do I know they actually read it? Well, that's what we're here for. So let's continue. So once you're not speaking, if I could ask you to mute your mic, because we do get some feedback once microphones are on. Thank you. All right. So let's start with some key reminders. Asynchronous teaching is still lesson planning. It's just now lesson planning for an asynchronous class. So somebody mentioned it. We always start our lesson with what? Objectives. We always start with what is the intention or the learning objective. What do I want to achieve when I send this home? Now, I heard some people say when I do an asynchronous session, I want my students to be able, y'all are getting this booklet after, right? So I forgot to say that. You all are going to get a copy of this. So you will have it. You want to think just like you would do in a physical classroom. What is the intent of the lesson? Now notice I'm saying lesson because a lot of people are still associating asynchronous with worksheets. And worksheets, and yes, it's an asynchronous activity, but you can have, we are talking about an asynchronous lesson here, where you are actually teaching your students in an asynchronous manner, right? So you start with your intention or your learning objectives. So you have your online platform. How are you going to tell your students what your objectives are? Just like we would go in the classroom and we would kind of give them something that will indicate what we are going to learn today. We need to communicate our objectives appropriately to our students. So that starts with how old is the child? So you can do it for primary school children. You can do it for kindergarten children. How can you do that? By using pictures, by using audio. So you can record your instructions. If you have older students, you can still record your instructions because we know sometimes some of our students can't read too well. What we really want to do is have our instructions really broken down in an e-learning setting. It needs to be in smaller chunks. You want to use very clear, simple language. Almost imagine when you are giving instructions in the classroom, what normally happens? You would have it written sometimes, you would say it, and then what's the next thing that happens? A student raises their hand. Miss Sir, what's the instruction again? So you have to almost imagine in an e-learning setting, the same thing is going to take place. So my instructions, you see, notice I actually put 1, 2, 3. Break it down like that. Don't have long paragraphs. Children tend not to read, especially this generation. Think about what they read. Listen, look at their WhatsApp conversations, right? They speak in very short sentences. So we want to cater for the students that we teach, right? So you want to use some clear, simple language. Don't give them vocabulary that is above their level, unless you're teaching them English and you want them to go to the dictionary. Small chunks. So for my students, and I teach secondary school, even for Form 5s, my instructions go like this one asynchronous setting. 1, go to X section. 2, click on the link. 3, submit whatever. 4, read whatever. So those are my instructions. And I have it dated. So every week I put out the date, and they have no excuse. And guess what? I have been getting all of my work coming in for my students because they have no excuse. They can no longer say, I don't understand, I didn't know where it was, etc. All right? And feel free to include audio or pictures to simplify instructions. So I've been using a lot of my Bitmojis. So like if there's something that I want them to pay attention, I would put a Bitmoji of myself saying, pay attention, you know, and it looks funny, but they do pay attention. You can use the GIFs, you can use the emojis, they like those things, stickers. So try to use pictures also to communicate. And as I mentioned, if you know you have students that do have difficulty with reading, include audio instructions. I teach foreign languages, so I also include audio to assist my students. They are not seeing me, but they do not lose out because they still get the pronunciation with audio. Either I record it myself or I find something that already is pre-recorded. All right, so that's the first thing. Is that clear? Yes? Great.
Yes, miss.
Somebody said yes, miss. My name is Leanne. Second,
Sorry, reflex.
that's okay. The second thing, choose a stimulating set induction. So some of you might be thinking, wait, asynchronous lesson are still doing set induction? Yes, because your asynchronous lesson is, I am still in the classroom. I'm just not physically there. So I want my students to be engaged. So maybe if I'm going to talk a little bit about sports, you know, I might put a little iguana playing with a football. And then my students, well, I teach boys, right? So I would tend to use football a lot or something that they would like. Put a picture that would get them to look at it. Or if you can get a meme that is related to the subject, because I mean, you know, they have several memes that would have like subject related matter. Or you put a joke or something that will get them starting to think, okay, I want to read ahead. I actually want to check out what this lesson is about. Or you can even give them a little, you know, maybe a riddle that is solved by the end of the lesson. Whatever it is, start thinking about how would you get your students to know what the lesson is about without necessarily stating this lesson is about XYZ. You want to create engagement. So you have to think about the students that are in front of you. How would you normally go into your classroom? Would you normally go and just write on the board a set of notes? And if you do that, does your class stay engaged when you do that? Would you go in the class and talk right through? Or would you have used a picture, whether it is an anchor chart, or if you have the option of PowerPoint or whatever you had in your school. But I'm sure you would have used some kind of stimulus. If you're going into the classroom, you may have, and you're doing a lab, you may have carried lab equipment. So you want to do that same kind of thing in the virtual setting. You want to have something that starts off your lesson. So we do our objectives first, and then we have a nice set induction that tells us about it. And the reason we need that set induction is because we want to start our students feeling excited about our class. All right. The next thing, we want to sometimes check what our students know, depending on what you're teaching and when you're teaching it. Because why do you want to know that? Why do you want to check for pre-knowledge before? Anybody? And this is in a normal class or an e-learning class. Why would you want to know what your students know? Why would you want to check what your students know before they get the instruction? Anybody? Come on, I'm sure we have some dependent people here.
To tailor, I guess, your objectives. I mean, you could have intended objectives for the class, but depending on what the children know or what they don't know, I guess you'd have to adjust your plan to kind of suit them.
Right. And that would work in the classroom. But if you're in an e-learning setting, why do you want to check for pre-knowledge? Don't worry, it's not a test. If you all don't know, I'm still giving you all the answer.
I'm not sure if my mic is clear. I'm having some issues with it, but pre-knowledge helps you to understand exactly where they're coming from and to clear up any misconceptions they may have.
But you're not in the classroom. This is asynchronous. You are not there.
Well, so this would be to test whether or not they've learned. I would.
Right, exactly. How do you know at the end of your session that your lesson was effective if you didn't know where they started? Right? And don't think pre-knowledge has to be some big test. It could be something real simple. So I've actually put some nice examples here. So you're in a history class, you put up a picture of Christopher Columbus and these were the Tainos, and you say caption this, one sentence. You know, so if some of them start talking about maybe, I don't know, somebody else, you know, if they put Martin Luther here, then we know, well, they have no idea what they're talking about, right? So caption this, a real simple thing, or you put up your music teacher, you put up some instruments and you say, caption this, you know, and they see the guitar and they put a drum, then we know, all right. So whatever it is, or you might do math and say, what is this? What is this about? So you can do very quick things in a, and this of course could be done like in a Google slide where you ask them, so you can actually see it, you share a document or it could be shared on a Word document, etc. And they send it back to you. So you can actually track what they knew before they did the lesson. Or you can have something like a picture of Dr. Eric Williams and you tell the student you have to ask this person a question. And of course the question must relate to who the person is. So of course we would probably think, you know, students will ask questions like something along independence or something along that line. But if they ask something that is way out of Dr. Eric Williams, and we say, all right, well, they really didn't know anything at all. We could do a short quiz, it could be like 5 questions, 10 questions, nothing much. You could do a Google form, a Microsoft form with 2-3 questions, just asking about the topic. You can even ask them to do a 30 seconds to 1 minute video recording based on some stimuli. So the same thing, instead of captioning this, you could ask them to record a sentence about this. Or you can do a very quick poll. So Zoom, for example, has quick polls. Edmodo has quick polls, which literally is, you probably ask them, you know, something and you give them 3 answers and they have to, so you get an idea of which students knew and which students didn't. So pre-knowledge, a lot of persons may think that pre-knowledge is not something that you need to test in an asynchronous setting, but it actually gives you good information as to which of your lessons work and which of the lessons don't work. So if the students did not know that this was Dr. Eric Williams at the beginning of the lesson, but then of course we're going to talk about what happens at the end of the lesson and they get to know that it was Dr. Eric Williams and who he was and what he did, then you know your lesson was a success. You also would be able to track if your students were actually paying attention and if they were actually going through the lesson as they should have. All right? Questions, comments so far? Or are we okay? Is this making sense? So I'm only seeing Avalon, right? Avalon is saying yes, so I'm taking that yes for everybody.
Yep.
Good. So the next thing would be where we actually get into teaching now. Now, you might be thinking, oh, there's a lot of elements for asynchronous lesson planning, right? And I will give a disclaimer. It does take some time to plan. However, when it's well planned, you do, in the long run, it is less stressful and the students are more engaged and you then have a lot more time once this aspect of it is finished. So your next thing is, how do I actually now transmit the content that I want my students to know? In the classroom, what would you do? You may have had a PowerPoint, a Google Slides, a Powtoon, I mean, Prezi or Sway, I mean, anything. Or you may have just had a picture up and you may have written on the board, whatever it is. The most important thing is what the content looks like. Your content should be easy to understand. Please avoid sending home PowerPoints that have tons of words on it. Remember, the generation that we teach, fortunately or unfortunately, they do not read in the same way. I wouldn't say they read less, but they do not read in the same way that we were taught to read, right? And there's a whole big argument about whether, you know, but we're not getting into that. But the reality is that the generation and Generation Z, they have grown up a little differently. And so reading for them must be meaningful. So include your emojis, include your visuals, things that they can relate to. And don't make the visuals overpower the content. The visuals should be related to your content, right? So don't just put random visuals. Include some audio, break it up, mix it up. Don't always have only words. For the e-learning lesson, try to focus on only 1 to 2 objectives at a time. So people might say, but then we'll never finish the curriculum. One of the good things about being home that I still think a lot of teachers have not recognized is that school is no longer necessarily between the hours of 8 and 2:30. Do you know that last term for March, I could give an example. When school closed in March, I started off very slowly and I said, I am not going to rush my students. I am going to get them accustomed to the e-learning platform. By the time I was finished, I didn't finish, obviously, where we would normally get with my Form 4s who were going into Form 5. But we continued work. Our platform stayed up, and every week I put up new content for my students for July and August. And because they had gotten accustomed to the content, school continued in July and August for them. I didn't necessarily need to go online, but they knew what they had to do. So they continued working, and we started back in September. And so when I give them deadlines, I am not interested in whether you stay up midnight to do your work, once you meet my deadline. So I gave them a deadline recently. We did 7 assessments up to this point for my Form 5s. And I gave them a deadline of the 18th to complete all. And of course, on the 18th, I'm just seeing work popping in and people asking me questions. All the work is finished. I mean, the deadline for them was really this week, but I gave them a little earlier deadline because we have to put in marks for midterm, right? And I also want you, this is very important, to include checkpoints for your students. So how many of you know the new quizzes, right? Now, the paid version, that is, right? The six US a month. So if you're interested, I bought it because I really like quizzes. But the quizzes now allows you to actually have a presentation and you have your quizzes questions in between. So it includes checkpoints. But there are other tools that do the same thing. And that's these tools across on this side, where you have your YouTube video that can be embedded with questions for Edpuzzle. NEPA does the same thing, and PeerDeck also does the same thing. All of them are where you can have your video or you can have your presentation and you can have questions in between. And what that does is as the students go along, you actually have checkpoints of, did you understand? And the thing is, that's the same thing you would normally do in your classroom. You would go into your classroom, you would teach a concept, and then what would you do? Give them 1 or 2 quick questions, not so? To check to see before you moved on to the next point. And you can do the same thing using technology tools. I would suggest try Edpuzzle first because Edpuzzle already has a large quantity of ready-made videos with questions embedded in them. And the good thing about it is you can do self-correcting. So you can set it up in such a way that the students' marks come back to you. It actually tells you how long they spent on the quiz. So you can tell if a student spent 1 minute versus a student who spent 10 minutes, which of course gives you additional data. You can see when the student did the test, right? And then that provides you with information. And it also provides you with not just information, but the ability to tell their parents what they did, if they did it, and they can no longer say, well, I did it or I didn't do it, because now you have evidence. You have evidence to show your principal, you have evidence to show whoever. So I'm going to pause here to take any questions or comments. I think I saw some comments in the chat. So let me see if I can get to those. But anybody else would like to ask questions, comments?
I'm actually quite fascinated with quizzes being able to have a PowerPoint presentation and have the questions right there. So I'm going to be looking at that for sure.
It is fantastic. I mean, we actually tried it. So and the thing with quizzes is that you can do it in 2 ways. You can actually do it live, where your teacher actually controls the content. So that will be in a synchronous setting. But then you can actually send it home and they can control their presentation and the questions pop up. And you still get to track their questions on quizzes. Edpuzzle does the same thing. NEPA does the same thing. PeerDeck does the same thing. And all of these... Go ahead.
Sorry, go on.
No, I was just saying that all of these are tools that are available that you can use, and most of them are free.
What I'm thinking is to have all of my presentations be available not just as a PDF, but also in video format. And if that is the case, having the ability to also have an interactive session during that is I'm liking it. So quiz, I'm excited.
Yeah, I mean, and there's so, I mean, sometimes it's just a matter of trying. And that's why I keep saying, you know, with 20% educators, I mean, many of you know me by now. I feel like, you know, the other day I went out to the mall and Avalon said, hi, Leanne, you know, and I've never met Avalon in person, but we've met because of 21st century educators. And it's great, you know, because we are all, you know, helping each other and building each other. I mean, that's fantastic. So even share your ideas. That's what we want to do, build that community so that we can all improve. All right, so if there are no questions, we're going to continue. So the next thing, after you've taught, what do you normally do? You normally do your formative assessment, because now, remember, we did our pre-knowledge. We now want to check if what we taught, if the students actually understood. So we now want to check and track student understanding and progress. And I think it was Luan, I believe, who said that she wants to ensure that her students were able to achieve the set objectives. So how do we measure understanding before the next class? Now, the next class may be a synchronous class, right? And I'm going to just touch a little bit on that. We can use quizzes. We can use Flipgrid, and Flipgrid is really a video where students actually give you feedback in terms of the video. Quizlet is another wonderful one that you can track. Quizalize is another one. And all of these have free versions that you can set up a class. You can actually set up your class and you can give them questions. And it normally tells you, gives you more information than just right or wrong, but it will give you information like which question was the most difficult. And what does that do? For your synchronous session now, instead of going through all the questions, you now want to focus on the questions that your students would have gotten, you know, most of your students would have had difficulties with, right? So that helps you to measure understanding before the next class. And that is why I said at the beginning, it is really very important that you set deadlines, reasonable deadlines, which means that you need to plan. You cannot be planning today for tomorrow. I would say you need to plan at least a week before. So what I try to do is I sit on either Saturday evening or Sunday evening and I plan out. Now, you don't necessarily need to plan everything in, you know, little detail, but you need to plan what you want to achieve for the week with your class, because then that will determine what my synchronous session looks like and what my asynchronous sessions look like. And so what I normally do is try for my asynchronous session lessons to be able to inform what I do in my synchronous sessions. Meaning when they come to the synchronous class, I can then actually tackle the things that were difficult for them, as opposed to just going over the whole lesson, which they obviously would have gotten based on their scores, etc. I would be able to check. Now, the other thing that I hear people being afraid of is, I've heard people say, but when I send them an asynchronous lesson or asynchronous test or asynchronous assessment, how do I know my students did it for themselves? We need to think about what we are sending home. If your students can Google answers, then maybe that's not an assessment to send home. Maybe we want to send home application type questions, and then we want to probably do things that are timed. So for example, in quizzes, for example, you have where you can set a timer for your question. So if we know we set a 30-second timer per question or a 1-minute timer per question, we know they don't have the opportunity to go and Google and come back, right? So those are some things that you can consider. If it's like knowledge-based, then make sure it's a test that you can set in terms of time. You can do that in Google Forms as well. You can have the Google Form set for like 30 minutes. So if they want to go use Google and find out answers, the thing is, you know, they're not going to finish the test. So, you know, those are things that you kind of explain to your students beforehand. You know, so if you go and try to use Google, you're not going to be able to finish. So Flipgrid is another one. If you're actually doing a presentation, I tell my students all the time, if you're doing a presentation and your camera is on, I must know if you're reading. I can tell if you're reading. I said I'm going to deduct marks if you're reading, because I teach French. So sometimes I actually want them to do a presentation, an oral presentation. So there are things that you have to think about which tool is going to be the best tool in this format. Quizalize is another one that I do recommend. And the reason that I recommend Quizalize is because it actually is able to do differentiation. So what Quizalize does is that you can actually give them questions, and depending on where they get, what marks they get, it sends them to a particular activity. So let's say, for example, they didn't do well on the test, it will send them to probably a YouTube video that you could assign to them. But if they did really well on the test, it could send them to like a next level. So you can actually have that as a very nice asynchronous activity where all your students are not progressing at the same level, but they're still getting their work done. All right. So I hope you all are understanding how you approach it. And it's really just a lesson plan. It's just a lesson plan for the e-environment, but it is a lesson plan that you're doing. You just have to think about, I am not in the classroom. So what are some of the things that my students would normally ask that I need to actually make sure and put down on the paper, that I need to put on the site? What do I need to give them? Because I'm not there to answer their questions immediately, right? And that's the kind of thing that you have to think about when you're planning. So, any questions, comments so far, or are we good? We're understanding, starting to make a little sense? Maybe, maybe not.
I know, definitely makes sense.
But wonderful.
There are a few comments on the
Chat.
on your.
All right, let me check. Let me see. Yes.
You want me?
Yes, somebody mentioned that you can use Edpuzzle to make your own videos. Yes. And it's not only YouTuber. Actually, Edpuzzle pulls from a wide range of videos. So it's YouTube. You have the TED education videos, National Geographic, like the Khan's Academy. You can pull from everything. Somebody said they use case studies or scenarios. Yes, and those are very good because it's application. And yes, live worksheets is another big one that I love. And I think by now, because I've spoken about live worksheets in lots of sessions, and if you don't know about it, it's definitely one to go and check out. Again, there are a lot of already made worksheets, so sometimes you don't even need to do your own, which I like. I like to do I like to check to see if there's stuff already done, because then you don't have to go reinvent the wheel. And moving on, the next thing I want to talk about is what kind of follow-up can we do? So you want students sometimes to do a follow-up. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean all the time. Right? You don't always have to give homework, just like you would normally give homework all the time. But in this particular setting, I would like to encourage some projects and project-based learning. So projects and project-based learning is not the same. Right? It's not synonymous. You have projects, but then you have project-based learning where students are actually going to create something. It doesn't have to look the same, but you actually give them the opportunity to create something. And you can use that over a period of time. So your whole lesson for the term might be building up to one big thing at the end of the day. But each time you give them a lesson, they're adding on to it. So, for example, you might be teaching them, let's do a primary school example. You might be teaching them shapes. And each time you have a shape that you teach them, you might tell them, all right, you're adding that to your artwork. You have to add that to your artwork. And at the end of it, they're going to create like a collage. But they could choose what they want their collage to look like. And but basically, they're going to be showing, they learned whatever. It could be done in art. You could probably want them to create a song. I don't know too much about music, so I'm not even going to try to give an example. But like I've seen the music teachers, they have given where you create your own instrument. But of course, it will be based on something in music, as I said. I don't want to, because I know I'm a music teacher here, so I don't want to embarrass myself, right? You can give them a science experiment. You can, if you're teaching home ec, you can give them something where they have to probably come up with a new way to do some kind of food, right? I mean, you can start thinking outside of the box, and believe me, the students now, they love to think outside of the box, right? You want to give some collaboration, because remember, students are not getting to socialize. We have collaborative tools where they can do work and you can monitor them. Things like Google Docs, you have Padlet, you have, a few other tools. If you're using Edmodo, you can do small groups where you can actually get your students to collaborate, and you can get them to collaborate on exciting projects. Like, they have to come up with some kind of new invention, or, it's the year, it's the year maybe 2040 and something has happened. What do you think a new car is going to look like? You know, and they get designs and whatever, but you're getting them to collaborate and you're getting them to still talk to each other, right? But in a productive manner. What about games? There are tons of free games for almost any subject area you can think of. All you have to do is Google games in math, games in French, games in history, games in whatever. And you give your students games that they can go and play, because I've often said it, students don't feel like they're doing work if they're playing. And that's okay. I always tell my students, hey, we're going to play a game today, you know. And in the back of my mind, I know the objective is to do X, Y, Z. And in their minds, they're playing a game. Guess what? Same objective achieved at the end of the day. And then, of course, we can do experiments. So even with my children at home, we've been doing some experiments. We have, you know, and well, I mean, they have a little science coats, and we've had them cooking. So they helped us make meatballs. I mean, sometimes the kitchen is much messier than if we were doing it by ourselves. But, you know, they actually have to record and talk about how they're making the meatballs. So guess what they're learning? They're learning, first you do this, then you do this, then you whatever. Lastly, you do this. They're learning creative writing because they have to describe how they made the meatball. I mean, and you know, what are the things that you have to do? You have to wash your hands, and then you have to, what are the ingredients? So they learn a few things. So you can actually do those things with your students. Think about your subject area. And if you can't think of anything, believe me, just Google it. I always tell people, Google is your friend. There are many things already out there that you can adjust, adapt, and adjust. So what are some of the benefits of asynchronous lesson planning? It's anywhere, anytime learning. Many of our students are sharing devices still, in spite of what we're hearing about 90% and 10%. And I'll leave it there, right? We want to be able to provide a lesson where a student is going to be able, if I missed my class, my live class, I can still follow an asynchronous lesson. I would not lose any benefit, because what a lot of teachers are now doing is just sending home worksheets and they're saying that's an asynchronous lesson. That's not, it's a worksheet. And a worksheet out of context, a worksheet without an assistant to help a student, we can't assume that parents know how to help them. We know that. And even if parents can't help them, many parents right now, it is very stressful because they're trying to help all three of their children who are on different levels. And I mean, even as a teacher, sometimes it is difficult. You know, there are concepts where I have to go and revise. I can't remember doing some of those things in primary school. You know, when they come and they ask you about the math and the new math, and they can't teach them it the way you learned it because they say, no, that's not what Miss said, you know, and you have to go and figure out the new way and whatever. You know, so those are some things. Think about the benefits of doing an asynchronous class. It allows for students to be able to learn anywhere and anytime. And it allows them to catch up even if they can't come to your class all the time in a synchronous setting. It allows them to access materials when convenient. So for me as a learner, I am not a morning person. I will stay up all night and I will get a lot more work done than if I try to do it during the day. So I probably start my work at 9. Sometimes I go in my bed 1 o'clock in the morning, and I am very productive. Between the hours of 8 to 10, I tell people, it's a fight to really be productive in that sense. We also have the opportunity to get them to start researching some of our answers. So we can send them things like web quests, a web quest where they go to a particular website and they have to find the answers for themselves, as opposed to the teacher being in the class always telling them. We are going to develop their research skills. And believe me, that's a skill that is going to be needed or is needed right now. Employers are asking for it. They can also express thoughts without interruption. Not all students benefit from the large classroom setting. Not all students are going to come in the synchronous setting and say anything, because they just shy. Some of them are introverted. Some of them are afraid to sound foolish. You know, some of them didn't have a pleasant experience while they were coming to school. So they're glad to hide now because the bully on the other side of the screen from, you know, and they can't hurt them. So this is an opportunity for some of those students to actually flourish. And studies have shown, the ones I've read a few, but there are some students actually benefiting from this environment. They're actually doing much better. I can tell you for my son, I've seen it. Because when he is home, although he's on the screen, his feet are moving. When he is tired of sitting, because he can't sit still for too long, he gets up, he can stretch, he's whatever, and he's paying attention. In school, he can't do that. It's sit and be still. I don't know how he's going to function going back out to school, but we'll see. Because I can tell you he's benefiting a lot more being at home because he has that little movement. We have him on a little rolly chair, and that just movement in the classroom allows him to stay focused. It also encourages independent learning because our students are now learning the benefits of I don't have Miss or Sir over me, but we have to get them into the habit because the reality is our school system has taught us to spoon feed our children a little too much at times. That exam culture, we're getting them ready for an exam, but we are losing that. We are also losing a generation who can think independently. And employers are now saying when people come to them for jobs, they have all the passes in the world, but what they are recognizing is that these children are not able to think on their own. So I think that this particular period, if handled well, it can really produce a bunch of resilient children, independent thinkers, creative students. So when you click here, because I'm going to give you the booklet, you are going to see a list of tools and their descriptions. I would have put this up on the page, so some of you may have seen it, but it literally tells you what the tool is for. Yes?
Yeah, somebody is asking that if Natasha, is it possible to start a new topic asynchronously?
Yes. So I will answer that just now, Natasha, right? Let me just tell you what this is about. So when you go here, you will actually see a list of all the different apps, and they're actually step-by-step guides to them and what they're best used for. All right, so that is in your booklet and you can have it. And then in terms of a little summary, and this can be used both in the live teaching, in the asynchronous teaching, when you go back to class teaching, right? I found this and I found it was very useful. In lesson planning, you always set goals. It's no different in the e-learning environment. What do you want students to be able to do, know, or understand by the end of the lesson? So in the asynchronous, when we're going to set up our asynchronous lesson, and Natasha, I'm going to answer your question now. What do I want my students to know? So if I'm introducing them to a topic, yes, I can introduce them to a new topic in an asynchronous lesson. What do I want them to know? So Natasha, since you asked the question, we're going to walk you through. Natasha, you have Natasha, have a microphone?
I'm here. I'm here.
Natasha,
Hi.
what subject do you teach?
Theatre arts, drama.
Theater arts, right. Give me an objective. We're going to walk you through a lesson.
This is why children don't answer in class. All right. Let's just go with stage areas.
Right.
Stage
But I
areas
don't know
would be a
anything
topic.
about theater arts, right? So you're
Well,
teaching all of us.
the parts of the stage.
Right,
Let's put
parts of the
something
stage.
else
So the
right?
objective is that you want your students to be able to identify the parts of the stage
At the end of the lesson, yeah.
at the end of the lesson. Good. So what actions are you going to have? How are you going to break down that in an asynchronous setting? What do I need to have?
Well, I need to have the picture of the stage so that they can see it.
Right?
The labeling for the parts of the stage.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's certain qualifications for the parts of the stage, as in stage left is different from our left and stage right is different from our right. So it's actually reversed. So there's that. What else? Well, that's basically it. I think we have to keep it simple, right? As in don't have too many objectives in
That's
the
right.
async. You see, my concern is sometimes it's easier for me to feed and talk to the student when I see they're looking confused. You understand? So in the interaction, I'm able to say, okay, do you understand this or do you understand that? So my concern is the ability or the lack thereof to ask, do you understand this? Or do
But
you
can't
understand that?
ask. You can't ask, do you understand this or do you understand that in an asynchronous setting?
And they actually answer and not go across it. Yeah, that was my concern. As
So
in our first lesson,
Right.
especially in a first lesson, because not all the time they will get the concept right away. So that was my concern.
Right.
Because I generally do the first class, beating the thing down, breaking it down, mashing it up, chili
Mm.
fine, fine, fine. Let's look at it, let's turn it around, let's understand it. And then if there are any other concepts to be done, I do that, in the other thing, but I'm not too sure. I'm a little concerned.
All
I'm
right.
a little concerned about my lack of ability to do that.
Don't be concerned. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to try it, but I want you to try it in very small bites. So you see that one objective that you just said about the stage?
The nine parts of the stage,
Right.
yes.
So you're going to start off with your little set induction. Maybe somebody, I sure you can find a funny video about a stage. Maybe they didn't know what they were doing and they fell off the stage. I don't know. So you find
Right.
a little funny video, and then your next step would be you want to know what they know about a stage. So you could probably
Okay.
ask them two quick questions. Name any two parts of a stage. They
Okay.
might, they may say
Right.
something.
It's a
They,
stage, it's a stage. Me know it's a
right.
stage. It's a stage.
That's a
The
stage,
thing you
but
just stand up on.
right. And that's okay, because you want to see if your lesson was successful. Then you find a way to teach it. So you might have a drawing, but you might also want to have, I'm sure that you could find a nice 3D video where they actually walk around and show them the stage. So you might have somebody actually
Okay.
talking over, or you might be able to find a video and then do your voiceover, right?
So, question. Some
Mhm.
of my kids will have phones and tablets. So these things that they have to open videos on and 3Ds thing this and 3Ds thing that. In your experience, it's been easy enough to do with
If
a device that is as small as a phone or a tablet
yes,
that may not have too much. What is the word am I looking for? It's not
memory,
connect.
sometimes with their phone,
Yeah, memory. Yeah.
once they can open YouTube, it'll be fine. Because what you
Okay.
can do is you can actually create a private channel for your students on YouTube. And we can talk about that after. You can always message me and we can talk about how to do that, right?
Okay.
So you have your stage, you have your 3D visual, and then you want to know if they got what you said. If they actually learned, so you're going to actually now have some kind of tracking device where you give them a little quick quiz. So whether it is on quizzes itself, where they now have to label the quiz, or whether you tell them recreate a drawing of it and send a picture, or whatever it is, but you must have something that tracks. Did they actually understand? Or you might now want to give them a little project, and their project might be to recreate a 3D version of it at home using materials at home. They can't go out and buy anything.
Right.
So you
Yeah.
must only use materials at home, and you're giving them marks now. Of course, you have your rubric.
Truth.
So you'll have your rubric, which is maybe some of them might use toilet paper rolls. Maybe some of them might use
Right.
pallet sticks. So you actually have now a
Yeah.
rubric that includes creativity. But you know what that tells you? They can also figure out how to build it. Did they actually understand the concept? And then you ask them to label it. You see, that's an asynchronous lesson. Now, when you meet them again for the synchronous session, and you're going through what you gave them to track, and you realize, oh gosh, nobody understood. I'm not even going to try to call up out of the stage, because again, I didn't get that, right?
Downstage.
Right. They didn't,
Downstage.
no, everybody put downstage as downstairs. So, all right, I
Yes.
have to go over that.
Right.
And
Okay.
that's where I'm now going to focus my energies in the synchronous classroom to get them focused on that. So yes, you
Okay.
can
It,
introduce
a
a
new
new
topic.
concept. Yes.
Okay, thank you, thank you. You've given me some inspiration. But the other thing is, so they don't have to have these different apps and tricks and things like Quizlet on their own phone in order to access anything. Because my kids are mostly using phones,
Right.
so
So I
they
always
don't have
tell
to
people
download stuff, right?
um you would have to download. So if they are mostly using phones and their phones don't have memory, you'd probably want to stay away from things like Flipgrid, Quizlet, quizzes. Most of those things work fine on the phones, but it's always
Right,
good to do a little test. So try not to give them too many things all at once.
right, right, right.
Right?
Keep it
So
simple.
keep it simple. People
Right,
think, oh, technology, I must use technology, then I must use 10 things. No, you can use two and I'll be fine. And
okay,
when you find something that works, you can use it.
okay, cool.
Right?
All right, thank
So I
you.
hope that answered your question.
Yeah. You give me some great information and great inspiration. So thank you very much.
Great. And I always like to ask, how did it go, right? So you need to send feedback.
Not a
So
problem.
the next thing is, well, we would have just spoken about that. You want your students to demonstrate learning. There must always be a demonstration of learning. Just like in the physical classroom, in the asynchronous setting, they must also demonstrate learning. And that demonstration of learning can be, of course, the different tracking tools that we spoke about. And it doesn't always have to be online demonstration. It can be something that they create, right? We can go with things like label your house, or we can, if you're teaching social studies, I don't know, you might want them to make a little video of what, you know, they're making a news report about what's happening in terms of domestic violence. How can you solve that? You know, or something to that effect. You would know your curriculum and your content, right? And then the last thing is, what do you need to facilitate the learning? That is an important question. Do not try something that you are not equipped to do. Always ensure that you are familiar with what you are going to do first. I've heard horror stories about teachers going online, students coming in their classrooms and doing whatever. And it is because, and I'm not blaming any teacher, because I know a lot of teachers were thrown into this head first without support. But always test out the tool first. Ensure that you have what is required before you assign something. And I always tell people, get one of your friends, a teacher friend, or if you have a spouse or anybody that you could call up and ask them to try it out. And that way you would be able to see what the student sees. So if you know you're having issues, the person not understanding your instructions, you know, ask your spouse or your friend, you find these instructions clear, especially somebody who is not in your subject area. If you could just kind of ask them, then they would be able to tell you what that means. And then you would know, all right. And also ask for feedback. It's okay if you do a lesson and it doesn't work out quite as well as you want. What is more important is to ask your students why it went wrong. Or how come you all love that exercise so much? And then you start getting what works for them. And then you could then build on that. All right. So that brings us to the end of the session. It's 2 minutes to 6. And we can still ask some questions, comments, just share. Tell me if you think it's a lot clearer now. I will be sending this to you along with your certificates. So you will get that probably by tomorrow. Yes, you get certificates. And I would just like to get some feedback.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yes, once you come to the sessions live, you get certificates. As I told others, because you would have been getting, and I really want to put a little plug here, please. I know a lot of you signed up for the site because of the webinars, but we really want you all to exercise too. We want holistic educators. So I'm putting a little plug in. We want you all to come to the exercise sessions. They have been fantastic. My legs are hurting from yesterday, but they are fantastic.
Second that. I second that. Fantastic.
I said that.
Yes.
It was a really good session yesterday. But can I just make one comment? Like, I am not an educator. I work as that's Lucas.
Hi, Lucas.
Okay, hold on. I work as a guidance officer, but we have been sending material out.
Yes.
And, you know, just getting that tweak on the different ways of delivery was important there. And I just wanted to say to the theater arts teacher, you know, I'm so excited. I want to be part of that lesson. I want to build that 3D model. I want to come into the class and fall down the stairs and songs. Like, it'll be a great lesson.
Yeah, they're going to be building stages. It's going to be fun. It's going to be fun.
So that was my comment. Thank you.
Hi, Lucas.
Yes.
Any other questions, comments? I hope you're feeling a little more comfortable. And I always tell people, you know, you can reach me, you can message me. I do try to answer once I'm available. You know, if you kind of like want to just brainstorm, it's fine. All right. But I really want us to start thinking it can work. I have been enjoying my online environment so much, and my students are having a blast. And I mean, what's that? Go ahead.
Here is something I'm thinking of, right? Because there are times when I send the notes or I send videos from before, and some persons will watch and some persons won't. So what would you think, could one of the sessions be me sending the video of my actual presentation connected to, like, let's say quizzes or some other medium where there are questions, and then going into that same presentation in my synchronous session? Or would that, since I'm not exploring different content, would that?
So you're saying you want to send it to them beforehand and then use that same content in your synchronous session to go deeper? That's what you're saying? Yeah, that's a possibility. I mean, it depends on the topic. I think one of the key things, because I heard you mention when you send notes, some of them read it and some of them don't. Please don't send in-depth notes.
No, PowerPoint presentation.
Right, but so
like
when you said notes,
okay,
but remember, it must be engaging. So, and again, it depends on your tech, you know, your skill. Try to gamify your lesson, right? So you can send notes, but it should be like, so, okay, I'm sending notes, but the next class we're playing Family Feud.
So that's what what I do is at the end, what I try to do, especially because like my class, if I'm doing, one of my classes is in the morning. Well, all of them are in the morning, but there's one, my fifth form class is in the morning at 8:30, and they complain about that. So what I try to do is I have it as interactive as possible. So once I finish explaining something, I then go on quizzes.
Right.
And I see how there is a dramatic change once they get that. Like those who were silent before, they start to speak.
Yeah,
but my challenge is, well, I guess I'm answering my question is, when I send just my PowerPoint presentation, and I don't like to put a lot of words on there, so it's literally 5 lines, if so much, on each slide. Many will tend to ignore it. So I guess because I want them to have a look at it before we get there. So I guess if I connect it to our quizzes, then more than likely, they will be more interested.
Yeah, it's just finding ways to engage them. So even if you want them to read, then tell them the next day we are going to be doing, so Form 5s, Standard 1s, everybody likes to play. I've always found if I want my students to read a note, I tell them the next day we are playing a game based on that note, and we are going to check to see who is the leader. And I make it a big thing. Look, so is the leader today. Well, I know who read their notes, and they say, Miss, let's play again now. Of course, I always have, my next game ready, because you want them to do it more than once. It's repetition. In their minds, they're playing games. So I'm just saying, remember, everything is about creating engagement. This generation likes to play games. So play games, right? This generation, even things like dancing or scavenger hunts. I've had students running around. I've had adults running around. There's some in the class here. And we had fun. So think about, how am I normally engaging these students in a physical setting? And then how can I translate that engagement in an online environment? So if you kind of think about it like that, then it becomes a little easier. And it takes some time. I'm not saying you're going to get it perfect, but eventually what you will see, and Alvin, you just identify that, you were able to figure out that tying it to a game made them more engaged. So you know what you have to do, right? It does take some planning, but it saves you some stress.
Work.
It is, but guess what?
Next year, I would have to do it.
Right. I always tell people that it's online, whether students go back out to school or not, it is there for you to use. So you put in the work now, and eventually you have a whole collection of stuff. All right. So any more questions? I think I saw.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a question. Okay, I heard it mentioned by another participant previously that the asynchronous session is used to introduce a topic, and the synchronous session used to, I suppose, go into detail of the areas that the students are not strong in, right?
You can do it both ways.
But yeah, that's far I'm wondering, because I do it the other way around. So my synchronous session is where I introduce the topic, but my asynchronous, which usually follows my synchronous, I guess, according to my timetable, is used to really reinforce the topic that I would have taught in the synchronous session. So I can see where the worksheet thing holds weight because I myself have done that. Where it's like, okay, remember we did this, this, this. Here's a worksheet. Let me see if you got it. Right. But I suppose, and I did use I think the lesson plan that she sent with the clickable links in it as a proper lesson in the asynchronous. But of course, being my lovely students, I say, they did come back with questions about what to do and whatever. And I was clear in it. I used Bitmojis and everything. Right? So I'm wondering, as you mentioned, which rotation, I suppose, which way would have been more, I don't know, palatable to the students.
Yeah.
If we
So
synchronous, yeah.
what I would suggest though, and it's something I probably didn't mention, anything that you're introducing to students for the first time, you should walk them through it in a live classroom. So if you're using Flipgrid, walk them through it. Don't just send a Flipgrid home with instructions. Just because they're into technology, we say that, this generation is into technology, but they're into technology that they like, right? So they could tell you about all the games and all the cheats and all the whatever, and the racing car and the this and the that and the whatever. And the Among Us, I know that's a new one, the Imposter Among Us. And it's always good to know what they do. So the new game is Imposter Among Us. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but basically is that they have to figure out who the imposter is, right? And you can actually make a lesson about that. But the whole thing is, you have to walk them through. Don't assume because they are into tech that they will be into the tech that you are sending home. So walk them through it, and then you can send your lesson and say, go to Flipgrid. So whether you choose to do your asynchronous and then synchronous or synchronous and asynchronous after that wouldn't matter, but you need to walk them through the tools.
What I did at that time, sorry, was I had done the live worksheets and I literally screenshotted. At the end of the live worksheets, it says you can send this email to your teacher or what, something like that. At the end, when you finish, do the thing and you see the score in red and you say you could email to your teacher. I literally screenshotted that and I typed out, don't click here, click here, and send it to me. But they were still like, yes, I could just send you a WhatsApp instead.
Yeah, but that happens. It happens even with adults.
Yeah.
Hi.
Yes.
Sorry, hi. I just wanted to suggest something to her. I also had that problem when I initially started the live worksheet. So what I did in my live session, I actually put up a live worksheet and I did it for the girls and went through how it is scored and all that and how to submit it. So I went through the whole process of doing the live worksheets and submitting it so they would see what happens when they do it.
Yeah, with any tool, any tech tool, I would suggest you spend some of your class time, and don't think that you're wasting class time. You're not, because then you'll be able to, once they get into the habit, you can add on more work. So start off small, very small chunks, just getting them accustomed. And then afterwards, because even if we return to school in January or September, or whenever we return to school, remember the benefit of being online and getting them accustomed to an online environment is that school doesn't stop at 2:30. You can give them extra work, that they can do when they are at home. Yes. So I don't have any more questions.
Pardon me,
But
miss?
yes.
Would the video be available afterwards?
Yes. So the
Will you
video
send
is
the video or?
yes. So the video, just like everything else, is sent via email. You all have been getting the exercise videos as well. Yes. So the videos are sent. Everything is sent.
That's a setup question, Leon.
Don't worry, I'm waiting to see you all. I should withhold. We are having a next session next week, Tuesday at 5:30. I feel I will withhold these certificates. But you all have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you so very much. And I do hope that the session was useful. I will send the video, the link to the video, along with the book. You all are getting the book as well as your certificates. You will get that by tomorrow. All right?
Thanks, Leon.
Thank you so much. It's awesome.
See you all. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank
Leanne.
you.
Natasha.
Thank you.